So anyone that's listened to any of my past conversations knows that I sadly always like to start off with the same question, but I like doing that because I always get very, very different, wildly different answers. So Monish, I would love for you to share, your path, how you got to be where you are. Typically these are in person or I'm in your office. I'd say how you got to be sitting in the chair that you're sitting in. Although clearly I imagine you're at home.
I am home, but everyone's journey, as you said, is different. And I've been very fortunate to get to do what I really love to do. I've been passionate about sort of machine learning and AI for a long time. My final year engineering project, many, many years ago,
Right.
with friends was actually, we got a pool table, we put a camera on top and a projector, and as you played pool, it would give you sort of the next best shot, right? So I've been passionate about this for a very long time. But at the time, AI wasn't as big as it is now. So majority of my career has been in enterprise software, really helping people buy or also build good software, right? So I've been a product manager, team lead, sort of a dev lead. But a few years ago, it sort of became clear to me that, now people are once again starting to look at machine learning and AI and starting to be excited about it. So if I really ever want to do what I love to do, maybe now is the time. And through my work, I had sort of seen the challenge of companies struggling to figure out how to start with AI, right? Like, what does the team look like? What do the skills look like? What does the data look like? How do we actually ship something like this?
Right.
So we really sort of focused on how do we help companies build great products that are data powered, that are AI powered, that help them differentiate in the marketplace or help them automate, and really try to get it to the market in a differentiated manner. So how do we help companies thrive in our AI powered world, right? Like how do we do that for companies, whether they have these skills in-house or not? So how do we help them get started, right? So that's really been a big motivator for us.
I love that. We'll dive into. I want a few questions in terms of how you help folks and where you see it going typically. But dive into some of the issues that folks run up against, because I imagine a lot of companies or a lot of individuals can resonate with that. So I'm gonna love to deep dive into that. And one thing that I think kind of struck me as we started our initial conversations was the similarities in terms of kind of our team, our focus, but specifically our missions. And we've got very prominently featured at kind of everywhere the concept of democratizing AI, and it's something. It's funny. I joined initially, and I'm like, well, that's great. That's kind of marketing speak. But as obviously, I've been here for a few years now, and it's just absolutely the truth. What does that phrase or that concept, the ability to democratize that type of technology, mean to you and your team?
For sure. And while we don't use that phrase, because of
course, absolutely,
it is often more frequently used, but the idea of, help companies survive and thrive and grow in our AI powered world, sort of that democratization really is at the heart of what we believe too. And so our thinking about it has always been sort of, my core thesis has been, AI will be everywhere. Right. And when I use the word AI, I really am talking about data science, machine learning AI, right? So I'm just going to use the word AI as a bit of a shorthand here. And that it will take over in some ways all aspects of our lives, right? Whether that's home, whether that's cars, whether that's our work, whether that's variety of products we use, processes that are going to get automated. It will impact all the various aspects of our society. And what was sort of weird to me, or what was in some ways scary to me, is that a lot of the AI sort of technology, the core technologies, while they're open source, a lot of people use APIs that are controlled by few companies, right?
Right.
So in single digits here, right? And I think that's not good. Like those types of oligopolies around our data, around these types of transformational technologies, is really not good. So our sort of way of working on this has been different from Fusemachines, but it's really been about how do we go to even smaller companies, whether they're tech companies or not, and say, can you own your own piece of AI technology, right?
Right.
Are you in control of your own destiny? Are you protecting your data? How are we setting you up for success in this increasingly AI-powered world? So our focus around democratization has really been about, are we helping businesses control their destiny?
Right.
Right. So really that alignment of ideas, and obviously you're looking at it very differently, is
Sure.
great.
Yeah, no, and that's, it's interesting again with all the complexities that you bring up, and with there's quite a bit of challenge, a lot of confusion. There's folks that are in leadership that don't necessarily understand this, but I still feel with all of that, companies are diving in or at least dipping their toes. I'm curious why you think that is as opposed to a few years ago, and that it does seem as though, as I'm paying attention to the news, there's really cool things with generative AI and just companies kind of coming up from all over the place. The clients that we're speaking to, we've got experience in this, but again, you kind of think, well, this is interesting. You wouldn't expect this type of a company be at the phase to be looking into this now. Why do you think that is, that it might be a bit of an inflection point?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that AI is now getting into more and more hands, whether that's through their phones, whether through their cars, whether that's through something like Alexa or their Roomba, into more and more homes, right? And then this next part is, media, movies, and then news, as you said, whether you're talking about chat GPTs or self-driving cars, or, when AI does something bad, right? More and more people, it's on people's minds that this notion of, hey, AI is going to be in all aspects of our lives. I think people are starting to see that, right? And as customers demand, as competitors do things, as partners sort of talk about it, I think more and more businesses are kind of saying, okay, wait, are we the laggards here? And I still don't think that's the case, but I think it will very quickly become the case where majority of the companies have some, whether they're building it themselves or not, they're at least using these technologies to, make their business better.
Right. And it's funny, I had a bet with my brother-in-law several years ago, because I think at the time I just believed everything out of Elon Musk's mouth, in which I thought that I think he was 10 years old, my 10-year-old nephew would never drive a car, because I was convinced by the time that he, 6 years into the future, my family, my sister and my brother-in-law would have bought a Tesla, and it would have been to that phase, and I've got beyond egg on my face with that. Absolutely.
I think a lot of people did. Yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, I didn't purchase the full self-driving, so at least I can put myself in the camp of not having paid for. But I on that vein, do you think, for some companies it might be now, some companies might think it may not be the time? And what do you think are some of those reasons that it might not be a good fit for some companies?
And so I think the aspect that people sort of miss about AI a lot is that until you do it, it's actually hard to know if it will be possible or not, right? So if we think about the way software has been for the last, 20, 30 years, right? The question was always, the question was never, can we do this? It was, how long will it take? How much will it cost? So the feasibility of what you wanted to do was never in question. Whereas AI almost always gets used to do things where it's like, until you try it, you're not going to know. And it might take, 3 months to solve a problem, or it might take 3 years to solve a problem, or it might take 30 years to solve a problem. And self-driving cars are a great example, right? Like, in some ways, I think there were examples of young hackers basically creating a self-driving car up and running within months, right?
Sure.
But then to get it to be something that you would trust day in and day out, variety of scenarios, we're not there yet, right? And the flip side of that is something like, say, ChatGPT or DALL-E, which is another OpenAI product that helps you images. There's Stable Diffusion, Midjourney. There's a bunch of these where you provide a text and it will generate an image. And if people had asked even 2-3 years ago, right, before the first sort of DALL-E came out, how close are we to being able to do something like this? Most people would have said, a long time. And suddenly we've kind of figured out how to do it. So there is this, unknowability about when are we going to
Right.
make barriers, right? So that presents this tension of, we've been talking about self-driving cars for 10 years. They're still not,
absolutely.
and this ability to create incredibly beautiful AI art, we weren't really talking about it, and suddenly it's everybody's hands, right? So that's what's fun. But let's sort of, if we think about that from a business perspective, when you are considering investing in AI projects, you do want to sort of go in knowing that, hey, some of these are still experimental, they're hypothetical, and sort of know what does your sort of investment model look like. It doesn't mean you don't try these things. It's just that, you kind of have to know where are you on that feasibility sort of curve or model. Is this something that you can do in 3 months, or are you willing to invest for 3 years because it's core key strategic sort of IP for you?
Well, I want to dive into that feasibility because again, I have your conversations with family. Me being considered an expert because I'm the one that knows how to install print drivers, and those are the types of conversations I'm in. Now I actually have an expert on the other side of the table. What's exciting? Fair enough. Well, what is exciting you right now? What is the art of the possible right now? What are you excited about in terms of, you know what, I think we're gonna get there.
Yeah, and so we've been following the I like applications of AI where they let you do things that you couldn't do before, right? So as opposed to sort of automating something, really I like it enabling things that you couldn't quite do before. Now you can argue sort of where is the line between automation versus innovation, and it's very much a fine line.
But I like that distinction. That's an interesting way to look at some of the stuff that's coming out.
Exactly, right? And so you could kind of think about something like generative art, AI generated art as an innovation thing. But if you are a designer, then it's very it potentially is a little bit scary where it's an automation thing, right? I was just kind of reading a story, a few days ago where some designer spent many hours designing I believe it was art for a book cover, and the client kind of went, oh, we're not going to pay you for this because this looks like AI generated art. You didn't actually do something, right? And that's kind of scary. But anyway, your question was, what's exciting? I mean, that is that's exciting. The ability to do that is very exciting. I think where the challenges is how will they actually get used? Do we as business, do we as society understand both the good and the bad implications of it enough to really sort of treat it with potentially some care that it needs? What feels like in the last 6 months is a lot of just very rapid deployment and usage, without potentially a lot of sort of thought into, should we be doing this, right? Like, is this the thing we really should be trying to do right now?
The Jurassic Park quote as to, you were too busy as to figuring out whether or not you could, you didn't think about whether you should.
Exactly, right. And I've seen sort of a bunch of examples. Another paper we recently seen about essentially ability to fake someone's voice with just 1 or 2 voice samples, really sound whatever you need to be able to say. Historically, that took a lot of data. Now it takes almost no data. And so could someone kind of call me on the phone?
Right.
I'm just kind of saying, hello, who is this? And
Omar couldn't make it today. This is my colleague, Chris. We've just leveraged some of our tools, a couple of screenshots, and it's fine. That's what's going on here today. But all jokes aside, that's not far away.
Exactly, right? So I think on one extreme, we have very low-hanging fruit where we still haven't deployed AI. And at the other extreme, we're kind of saying, can we start to deploy AI in these potentially very interesting scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So I think the idea that there has been sort of this notion of, software developer jobs are safe, or designer jobs are safe, or creative jobs are safe, or leadership jobs are safe, from AI. And now I think we would have to kind of say, maybe never say never, right? Like in terms of, hey, AI is never going to impact this. And when I sort of talk to my little nephews and nieces about what they should be, because a lot of them are like, oh, I want to learn programming. And I'm kind of wondering, wait a minute, what does programming look like in 5-10 years? And it's incredibly hard to predict. So it's not just designers, but there has been a lot of innovation. It's been in things like programming too, right? Like AI will come for programming.
Generative coding was something. It's funny because I think that I've seen memes online in which individuals are laughing at the artists or laughing at the musicians or what have you. And then the coders are like, wait a minute. You're coming, you can do this as well. That's something that's in, we talk about the arts and things that may not be, I don't want to say not useful, but things that, towards beauty and culture, but coding, the ability to have AI generate software would be, I imagine, pretty powerful.
Yeah, and it's already in some ways out there, right? Or at least the beginning trends of that. It's actually deployed by even large companies like Microsoft, right? Like they have products where there is an AI that's helping you write your code or actually writing it for you. And sort of one sort of idea is, what does this do to our broader work environment, society? What are the ethical implications of this? And I'm by no means an expert in this, but I'd at least say that I don't know if enough questions are being asked and enough thought is being put into, as you said. I don't think people are asking, should we do this? It's a lot of like, I can do this, so let's go do this.
Right. And it's always tough for legislation to keep up. I know it's silly and not quite the same thing, but I remember I was visiting family in Los Angeles and there was just these scooters everywhere. Not AI by anybody, but regardless, just the point of the technology developed so quickly and there was no legislation around it, and the people were just leaving them left, right, and center. And now with things like with the generative AI and new technologies that are coming up, it's interesting how it happens so fast and we don't know what to do with it, and lawmakers are left in the lurch trying to catch up.
I mean, I would say even AI people are all catching up because of the pace of innovation and the breadth of innovation, right?
That's something.
It's hard to kind of picture government and lawmakers keeping up.
Right.
And I mean, the fact is, even when they kind of try, I don't think that they're kind of thinking it through. I've heard and I haven't sort of, but I was recently reading that China has implemented laws around like, who is using AI generation tools, and anytime that AI generated artwork and things like that are used, that they need to disclose that, right? So I mean, I think different countries are approaching it differently. Canada is obviously working on some regulations, so is the US, so is the EU. And in some ways, I think that the regulations outdated pretty quickly. Either it's too restrictive, it's not recognizing that this is still an area of innovation, but at the same time, in trying to sort of protect the threat, it goes very much either in one direction where it doesn't recognize it, another direction where it's just kind of painting everything with a broad brush. Because a company deploying an AI system, a computer vision system that's helping them figure out whether the widget that they're making is good or bad, quality control, right?
Of course.
Whether something like that should be regulated is not clear to me, as opposed to something like AI generated art or text or code.
Right.
That's probably different. Like, so we need to treat these things differently. And I do think,
but it's interesting that someone like you would even, I wouldn't say struggle, but there's some thought we can put in, and folks in this space that are actually working day-to-day in AI don't have all the answers. It's a bit concerning. You would hope that those in charge of regulating would be pulling in, the right brain trust in order to make those types of decisions. You've seen, the internet folks that were regulating the internet in the early days and didn't understand, basic browsers or things to that degree. It can be a little frightening in terms of that.
I mean, there's an argument to be made that the lack of regulation of early internet is what really let it flourish, right? It is one of the very few areas where there is little to no regulation, which is really allowed it for greater innovation. Now, I'm not saying that's the right path. This is definitely beyond my skills, sort of how to regulate these.
No, fair enough, but it's an interesting conversation.
But as someone who likely the regulation will apply to, I do believe there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of unanswered or non-answers to those questions.
Right. So on that end, like, what do you think folks are leadership, companies, folks in your position are struggling with in terms of, or the folks that you work with, I should say, that are struggling with in terms of adopting AI? I know I have my questions and wonderfully, but I can lean on a set of, a team of experts to kind of calm my fears and get us to where we need to get to. But what do you think what have you seen in terms of struggling with adoption?
I mean, there's many factors, right? So even the things we just talked about, do I know, will it work, right? Should I investing in this? Should I be building this in-house or should I be just using an API? Right? Like, what is my strategic decision here? How do I try this so that I know whether it's going to work for me or not? Customers, I mean, there's a lot of FUD out there. There's a lot of misunderstandings out there. So I think there is a little bit of a fog there that people need to clear. So I do think people struggle with that. And my recommendation there tends to be, I think the only way to kind of clear the fog is to let the sun in, which is, gain the skill set, whether by learning about it, whether by talking to people about it, whether bringing someone on within your organization who can help you kind of get through this. I think sort of that skill set aspect of it is a big one. And I think for people who are struggling, I really, to get started in some ways, or businesses, I really kind of talk about the fact that, yes, you want a solution or an AI system that's either going to sort of generate revenue or reduce costs or reduce risk or something like that. I think the first goal should be to really maximize learning, right? It is a very new area. I want to be clear, it's not that complicated, right? Like, it is data science, not rocket science, right? But I do think that approaching it, at least for the first little while, it may be weeks or maybe months, but just the first little while, with the goal of let's maximize learning in this area as opposed to try to maximize profits, I think goes a long way in leading to a longer term success, because it is a challenging.
Sorry to cut you off, but do you find it that most people easily buy into that concept of learning first and we'll get to revenue, but we need to focus? Or is that a challenging conversation that you're having? I imagine in terms of the conversations we're having with large enterprise companies, that might be a tough one. We're not doing this for fun. Might be something that I'd be met with. How are you finding that?
It's almost always a very difficult conversation. I don't know if anybody really fully buys it. But we've seen it again and again that approach leads to a better outcome. So what I kind of like to think about is when you approach it from a maximized learning perspective, what you end up doing at a very basic level, you can do a lot of things, but at least at a very basic level, you kind of look at all the data that you have. And in some ways, you have to kind of fall in love with that data, right? Like, you really have to spend time understanding what it is, and what you have, what you don't have, or the gaps are, quality, or insights that lay within it, and those are the ones that drive then value. So in some ways, this kind of boils down to the notion of trust the process, right? So the process we are talking about here is this notion of maximize learning, faster feedback loops, fall in love with the data, and if you kind of really stick to that and trust the process, it does lead to innovative, and by innovation I actually mean valuable, right? Sort of profit generating ideas and opportunities, versus just kind of trying to chase that. It does feel a bit counterintuitive.
No, I adore that. I think that's
the innovative process, right? You have to trust the process as opposed to sort of chase the outcome.
Absolutely. No, I think that's such an excellent way. If you're dealing with leadership that might not have, an engineering background, if you can, I think that's so succinctly put in terms of falling in love with the data, and trusting that process. We'll get there, but we do really need to understand and build that foundation such that you can phrase it in X number of ways in which it'll be receptive to that type of a persona. But it's the truth. I love that concept of falling in love with the data.
And so, early on when you kind of asked me, hey, what should the companies be doing? I kind of talked about skill set, right? Sort of start to clear the fog and learn what this is all about. These last points we've been talking about, I really kind of like to sort of bring the other point, which is the mindset, right? Do you have, as an organization, as a leader, the right mindset to be successful about this? Because again, if you approach this as a typical sort of traditional project or even traditional software project, you may succeed, but more than likely, I don't think you will get the optimal result, right? So I think recognizing how AI development or AI products or solutions are different from typical software goes a long way, and having that mindset, it's much more iterative, it's much more experimental. And experimental doesn't mean it's gonna fail a lot, right? Like, it doesn't mean you're gonna waste a lot of money. I think you have to be deliberate in how you experiment, and then sort of minimize your downside risk. I mean, this is what we like to work with our customers on, is how do we get you started with success? Like, how do we get you started right, so that your first project, first idea that you work on leads to a good outcome.
Right. No, I love that. And I imagine, folks might be like me in that I've come from a software background. By no means was I a developer, but I was kind of on the implementation side and follow those processes. And it's funny. You're right. I kind of have to unlearn a lot, like a decade's worth of process. What do you mean, Monish? Software is software. I mean, I guess at the end, there's some nifty algorithms happening and some models happening, but really software is software. And that's not the case in terms of from the conceptualization phase all the way to production, to getting to production. That's interesting.
For sure. There are a lot of similarities. I mean, there are more similarities than there are differences, but if you think about the differences and treat it just as as if you're building an app or a website or an enterprise software, it likely leads you down some weird sort of decisions, right? And this is where you kind of see companies have, hired a bunch of PhDs, given them a floor and kind of build AI coolness, and then kind of struggle to ship, right? Like, how do you actually get something valuable in your customers' hands, right? And that process needs to recognize that it's different. It can't be treated as it's so special that we're gonna let you do whatever you want. And it can't also be like, oh, it's the same as before. It really kind of is different in its own way.
Right. Now, it's an interesting balance, I imagine. Again, I keep thinking about our clients and the decision makers and leadership in terms of on the data science side, of the data engineering side, and the AI side, as well as leadership. You do need to have that balance of that understanding and everyone being kind of on the same page and allowing people to do what they're supposed to do. But yeah, it's funny. I think it's almost less of an asset to come from kind of that old world of software, because you're right. I know we've experienced this, and you're speaking with a leader that I've got 15 years of X experience in software. That might be you might be kind of stuck in the muck of and not thinking about it in the way that you're thinking about it. I hadn't heard it put that way. It's very clear. I'm just thinking about this. These are the types of things that I'll talk to my team in which they're having initial conversations with some folks that might be a bit challenging on the enterprise side. I think that is a really cool way to look at it. So we've spoken a great deal in terms of how to be successful. I think in terms of mindset. I love the phrase falling in love with your data. I'm such a nerd, which I think is, and then trusting that process in addition to that, and that mindset kind of on both sides of the organization. But I know you must have had challenges that you've overcome when working on either research internally or with client projects. I'd be so curious to know what are those challenges that you and your team have been able to get through.
Yeah, and I mean, there is a very sort of common, obvious, unsurprising sort of answer to that.
Sure.
Data. Sort of, every single project, right? There's a 100% hit rate.
Right.
Has had a data problem, right? No data, insufficient data,
right.
unlabeled data. poor quality, missing data, inaccessible, sort of just a variety of problems related to data, right? And so I think, I mean, to the extent that we
But
can
if you don't have the data, you don't have the data. Like, how do you get around that? I'm so curious.
yeah, and I mean, there's a bunch of ways, right? Can you buy, beg, borrow,
Fair enough.
steal your data,
Sure.
right? Can you generate this data? Can you infer this data? I mean, this is where the creativity
Yeah.
comes in, right? Where are you able to bootstrap your way to some product or some initial solution, which then lets you gather more data, right? So I think there's a bunch of ways to solve these types of problems, but what I would say really is it's best not to have this problem.
Yeah.
And I think people sort of thinking about data as an asset, people kind of keep thinking about their people as an asset, their customer as an asset, their assets as an asset. But I think if you kind of start about your data as an asset and treat it as sort of the high value commodity that it is,
right,
I think you would not have these challenges. So I would say, broadly speaking, and I would include us in this, right? Like, we all sort of underinvest in our data, even though it is sort of the fuel of the future.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think I've had conversations in which, at least with some larger organizations, in which they're trying to monetize their data. They don't know where to start. What's exhaust, what's valuable. And that's been a really key conversation that we've had.
But that's exactly where I would kind of go, like where I would go to what you just said, which is, I think that's the mindset conversation we were having, right? The goal that they're starting with is, I want to monetize my data.
Yeah.
As opposed to kind of going back to the process, which is, let's understand the data. And then see what the data tells us, right? As opposed to us kind of saying, this is what we're going to do, and then hoping the data fits into that.
Right. No, I guess I can be guilty of it. Absolutely. It's that is interesting. And
I mean, it's the natural way to approach this, right? And it's not a bad way to approach it either. It's just that when it's not working, we find that the other way is a little bit weird, but
yeah,
more.
Yeah. Well, I would hope that folks in that position like me would just listen to the other person on the other side of the data, and again, like you said, trust the process. So again, you've clearly got clients that have fallen in love with the process, have fallen in love with the data, have overcome challenges. What are any examples, whether either you've come across it in other, you've read about, or not necessarily within your world, but like, what are some examples of projects that weren't successful, that they just didn't get it? What happened? Anything that you've seen recently?
Yeah, and I think what it ends up being almost always is the lack of clarity around problem definition, right? So do what we're trying to do, right? So because I think that lack of clarity then shows up in how you make decisions throughout the development and sort of launch process, right? So either the sort of the problem ends up being a bit premature, right? Sort of are you coming at the problem from the data, or are you coming at this problem from intuition? And so I think sort of knowing what you are trying to accomplish and why you are trying to accomplish, or I suppose I should clarify, not knowing those two things, that really ends up being the root cause in many cases, aside from the data, right? And so we've talked about enough about data, so I don't want to talk about data anymore.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
and if don't think about the data, that ends up being often the root cause of things not going well.
Right. And I think that's absolutely good advice. Yeah, I've again, in terms of, I like to bookend these conversations kind of in a similar fashion, again, for the same reason that I do get differing answers. And you're a bit of a serial serial entrepreneur. Maybe I don't know if that's
Not
a
quite
fair
serial,
assessment.
no.
Not quite serial, but fair enough. Not your first rodeo. I'll put it that way. But I would love to take the opportunity. You know, I think some of the folks that listen are just hoping to be in your position someday, or maybe in early stages of that path. Any advice you would give to some of those aspiring founders?
I certainly do not feel advice to anyone. I mean, I think that's
we will argue about that later. But please indulge me.
But I mean, what I will say is from my perspective, right? So it's not necessarily advice as much as I think why we do what we do, right? And
Yeah.
it's, you know, I really get to love to do what I do, and I think some people say, you know, don't turn your hobbies into something you work on, and don't work on things that you love. But
Sure.
I think it sort of works at least for me. And two, like, I mean, have fun with your people, right? Sort of take care of your people, caring about your team, your customers, right? Caring about the community within which you operate, particularly your team, goes a long way, right? Because I think without them, you can't really do, especially the type of work that we do.
Absolutely.
We need people who are significantly smarter than me to do. And you want to have fun with them, right? Like, otherwise and you want to be learning from them. Otherwise what's the point? So I would say take care of your teams and yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you talk about taking your hobbies in term, you know, and that becoming your career, I imagine starting off with an AI driven pool table is a pretty great way to is a good example of walking the walk and talking the talk. Lastly on this, again, I appreciate your time today so much, and that I've taken up too much of it. What is on deck? What is upcoming for Grady and Ascent AI in the coming year? Anything interesting that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we continue to want to solve interesting problems with our customers, and especially problems that are at the intersection of, you know, data and math and design, right? Because that's really where we thrive.
Right.
But one of the things I'm very excited about this year, sort of, you know, from that is working more and more with partners, right? So partners such as yourselves, right? So
absolutely,
being part of larger teams and collaborating more with other people. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know, Monish, I super appreciate your time. I was dying for this conversation. I think in our early conversations as we first met, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna need to pick this brain in particular. And typically, I think any of the last podcasts, I cheat. I just pick individuals that I just really want to talk to for a decent amount of time and learn a little bit from. So I can't tell you how appreciative of your time today.
No, and I'm excited about sort of the time we spent and getting to sort of discuss and debate these ideas.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's, you know, we're still at the beginning of this, so it's great to learn and share. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine we will continue to do this. I imagine not our last conversation by any stretch. And all the best in the new year, and hoping to many more conversations just like this.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you, sir. Enjoy the rest of your day.